Welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I am Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. Today, I'm really lucky to be with Chad Fleischer, Director of Enterprise Sales for Netradyne, who lives in Boise, Idaho. And I learned how to say Boise properly from Chad. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me today. Yeah, and yes, it is Boise for all of you out there. It is not Boise. So chances are you probably will never come to Boise. So you will not be corrected. But if you do say Boise to a native here, you may be corrected.
Yeah, that's cool. So, yes. I have always said Boise, and I will never say it again. So you and I were chatting a week or so ago about selling modern enterprise selling, and it's funny. I was thinking that way back in the day, selling classes used to be what I call charm school, right? That was kind of it, and then it kind of morphed into selling process, like a one size fits all methodology for moving things through the stages. But it's funny because as you and I were just talking about that general evolution, you talked a little bit about relationships, and that's where we went off. And so I want to talk to you about that today. When people speak of developing relationships in sales in a traditional sense, what do you think they mean?
I think so. Since I deal in the enterprise space, I deal with a lot more seasoned reps. So we may see people that have been around for a while and whatnot and have developed relationships over time. Ultimately, what I believe people think of when they think of relationship selling is I'm friends with someone.
Yes.
We have a good rapport. We maybe play golf together every once in a while, or we can go to happy hour and we have a good conversation and we know each other, the names of our kids and things along those lines. And so I think a lot of times when people think of relationships, they don't really differentiate the relationship from a business standpoint versus the relationship from a personal standpoint. So I find there's a kind of a blurry line with people that have been doing this for a long time between articulating a friend they may still have from college that they go and play golf with on the weekend and the person that might be their main point of contact at one of their clients that they've done business with for a significant amount of time.
Yeah. And what role do you think that plays in modern selling? I think this is where you and I really took off on this topic. It's like, yeah, that's from whence we came for a lot of us, but how's that playing out today?
So I think that there's always been, and you still hear it to this day, and I do believe that there is some validity to this, that people will buy from people that they like. And I think a lot of times salespeople will run with that and be like, hey, if the customer likes me, then they're going to buy from me. And ultimately, I guess if it turns into your products are exactly the same and I'm in a commodity sale and you're friendly and easy to work with and your competitor is difficult to work with, then chances are I'm probably going to lean towards you. But at the end of the day, in today's world, I just find that people, yes, they buy from people they like, but they buy from people that bring value to their day to day life. And so the way I've seen relationships work actually over time, as the way I kind of train, mentor, coach, and then even in my own world, is that your relationship with a client is really only as strong as the value that you can provide. And the definition of that value can vary. It can be in the value that your product in and of itself brings. It can be the value that you bring with regards to your knowledge within the industry to where you're able to bring tidbits of information to them that maybe they don't see because you are in it and you deal with so many various different types of clients. But at the end of the day, I am a firm believer that nobody is going to make a $200,000, a $40,000, or a $2 million purchase based on the person that they like the most and they can sit down and drink a beer with. That ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're selling has to have value. And the relationship that will cement you to your client is the value that you can provide to that client.
Yeah.
In the ways that I just kind of described.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think anybody listening is going to sort of argue with what we're talking about here. However, one of my relatives is listening to this who is a really good tech sales guy. He says to me all the time, about drinking scotch and golfing and, who's doing that, and there's still a lot of that going on. And there's still a lot of people that believe that that's the thing. And he's very successful They believe that's the thing that's making them successful. So I think there still is kind of a lag for some of the people who have been doing this for quite a while. But what do you think has changed in the buyer's world that has shifted this from sort of the human relationship to the business relationship in terms of driving their decisions? Why is kind of only personal relationship becoming a little outmoded as the lead?
It's interesting because I think it's just the amount of information that's at a buyer's fingertips now. You know, and it's not new. I mean, ever since the internet came around, I mean, now all of a sudden I can do a Google search if I'm responsible for finding a new piece of software for potentially security within my network. I can type network security product into my search bar and come up with a million of them. And I can
Yes.
do a ton of research before I ever have to deal with a salesperson. And so ultimately, I think that's what really kind of cements that value, because the pitch and the generalized value propositions of your solution, for the most part, I probably already know because I've done the appropriate research
Mm.
and I haven't called you out of the blue. Rarely does a customer sit down and be like, all right, I need a list of phone numbers of people who sell this. And then they pick up the phone and they just start calling and getting pitches from salespeople
Yeah.
from an inbound standpoint. They're doing all of that work, and then they'll reach out to those that they feel are at the best of their kind of fit their needs the best. So where a salesperson can come in and present value is the things that aren't on the website, the other types of information that may be industry wide, how I've worked with other clients, where other clients have found value in similar verticals like the client that you're on the phone with now. So I think that's where the relationship in and of itself comes in. And it's different because, and again, I'm more on the B2B side. So this, drinking scotch and having cigars and playing golf and things along those lines, maybe that keeps my car insurance with you over time
Yes.
and you build a book of
Yeah.
business. Or maybe that means when I go buy a car, the next time maybe I'll buy it from you. But again, the buying experience in and of itself is what's going to bring me back to those types of things repeatedly, because I mean, Brian, no slight, but I don't really care how much we like each other. If you're selling me my car insurance and you come to me and tell me that there's going to be a 40% increase in my premium, loyalty only goes so far.
Right.
So
Yeah.
ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm probably going to end up looking for something different. So I guess at the end of the day, to answer your question, the biggest thing that's changed between now, the past and now, it's just information. I mean, it depends on what you look, 67%, 73% of the
Right.
information is already gathered by the buyer before they actually engage with the organization in and of itself. So your ability to provide unique perspective outside of just standard feature benefit stuff that I can find on your website is the thing that will really cement your relationship with
Yep.
clients.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I will add a little bit to that. The research came out a couple of years ago about committee buys. Now there's something, I don't know how this works. It's like 6.7 people per buy. I'm not exactly sure how we get to the point 0.7, but no decision is rising over the last few years. And one of the arguments is it's the complexity of the buy with all these committee buys now, and with a ton more data out there, that the buyers aren't really good at functioning in this new market. And all this came to mind, Chad, when you were talking about leading them, bringing things to them, and sharing experiences from other organizations. And I think about decision making. It's kind of classic in sales to say, well, what's the customer's decision making process? I would argue that they're struggling with that, and we need to help them with that decision making process. I'm curious as to your feedback on that.
That's a great point. We talk a lot about that in my current role now, about being prescriptive and helping people make purchasing processes. In the world that I work in currently now, we deal with trucking and things along those lines. And even though I deal with the enterprise and some pretty large organizations that my team calls on that have sophisticated buying processes and these committees and things along those lines, down market, a trucking organization may be going, from a paper-based process to a digital process, and they've never even bought a piece of technology, hardware or software in their lives.
Yes.
So being able to guide them through that process really can provide that value that we've kind of been talking about throughout this, that is outside of the traditional, hey, our widget does A, B, and C, and our competitor's widget does C, D, and E. It really can. So yes, being prescriptive, people don't know how to buy. And especially when you get into multi-threaded opportunities like you mentioned, where there may be a buying committee or you've got people that are weighing in from different areas within the organization. And this is really prevalent in the enterprise. The more prescriptive you can be about the process
Yeah.
of how other organizations work with your company, from discovery to demo to trial to purchase, they're actually very open to that,
Yeah.
because each organization has its own kind of purchasing journey, buying process journey. And the more prescriptive you can be, it just reduces the amount of confusion, and it can really speed the process considerably.
Yeah, and I think that, like, as we're talking through this, like, that's the thing, is being prescriptive, and I love the use of that word. I think it was CSO Insights that came out with a study recently that said that sellers are ninth out of 10 places buyers go for information, and that is when, because people aren't being prescriptive enough. I heard someone say, you were talking about, like, how often do customers make this kind of buy? You and your team make that kind of sell every day and watch people buy this every day. And someone said that customers are sort of like veterinarians. They're dealing with a bird and then a snake and then a mouse, whatever is coming into their office. And we're not only neurosurgeons, we're spine neurosurgeons on this thing. We know how people should buy security products, right? And that's, I think, that goes back to, who do you think it's incumbent upon to give that prescriptive, build that prescriptive data and get it in front of the salespeople?
So I'm a big proponent in salespeople need to help build that prescriptive aspect out. So the way I found it worked the best is salespeople tell your enablement people how it is that you want the salespeople to be onboarded and trained on this process. But with myself and the role and the people that I'm responsible for in my current role, we spend a lot of time talking about that,
Yeah,
the process. Here's an opportunity, we've got it in, it's discovery. How are we going to walk them through that? So we talk a lot about how do you make the hamburger the same way
yeah,
every single time
yeah,
to the best of our ability, knowing that there will be some variations. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, the salesperson should have a pretty good grip and understanding of how the sales process should go. Now, a 23-year-old directly out of college is probably going to require an extreme amount of handholding and coaching and teaching along the way to get them to that process. But a 20-year veteran of enterprise sales should be able to pretty quickly and easily adapt from organization to organization how to provide a prescriptive way to move from point A to point Z in a sales pursuit.
yeah. I mean, it's to me, it's like that. It's just taking a note. It's like this massive shift. If we take the decision sort of spot in the sales process alone and say that, most people are taught, and there's a lot of forms they have to fill out on elsewhere to say, what is the customer's decision process? The data's out there to say their decision process, more often than not, they're making suboptimal decisions. They're buying things, like, I know people will say, I won a deal and maybe I shouldn't have won it. Maybe I wasn't the best solution. I won it for the wrong reason, or I lost it for the wrong reason. A customer would have been much better off with a Netrodyne solution than what they did, but they had this suboptimal process. So this is the point of that, is this is a massive shift to go from let me understand your broken suboptimal process and try to work into it, to let me bring in some prescriptive advice. And I think there's a lot of value add for the buyer there, right? To be able to come in and say, we know the optimal, we know who should be involved, we know the criteria you should be using, given whatever the business results you're looking for. Here's how you should be making this decision. It's a pretty big but powerful switch.
And I think it's important as well, just because a true partner, I mean, I know we talk a lot about partnerships and how, we're going to be partners with our clients and things along those lines. And a lot of times the salespeople, there's a lot of salespeople that are in sales right now that don't want to be perceived as salespeople, because the perception of sales, if you walk into a high school classroom right now and say, when I say I'm in sales, what do you perceive? and they immediately perceive somebody that's knocking on their door and trying to power sell them something. But for the most part, 99% of them will think of some guy on a car lot, some stereotypical guy that just is the worst, pressuring you to buy something that you don't
Yeah.
want. And ultimately, that's kind of what they think of. And from a sales standpoint, if you're truly going to have a partnership, you need to be able to stand up for yourself and be respectful. And part of that is kind of earning the opportunity to kind of what I always call poke your customer in the eye when they're not, you're not aligned.
Yes.
Okay. Because if you're not aligned and you're not bringing value to the relationship and the customer is not proving that they see value in what it is that you do, you're a vendor. Okay. And when you're a vendor, you're no different than the Coca-Cola machine in the lobby. I put in $1 and a Coca-Cola comes out. So they give me money and I hand them a product. And that's as far as our relationship goes. There's no stickiness in there.
Yeah.
There's no long-term after sell. There's nothing else associated with that. So ultimately, I think, just at the end of the day, when you're being prescriptive like that, not only is it helping the client, it's also showing that you're confident enough in what it is that you're doing that they can partner with you and that they're not just going to roll over on you. And then you get to procurement and all of a sudden you need a 92% discount
Right.
to do business with them. And since you've never told them no
Yeah.
or given them any direction throughout the entire sales process, stuck.
That's a whole other podcast for sure that I really would love to dive. I'd love to dive. But yeah, you make me think of in my previous venture, one of my best sales people, he was retired military and an engineer. And when I wanted to move him into selling, he was like, wait, I'm military, I'm an engineer. But that to me, that cadence that he had from the military upbringing to the engineering, analytical, problem solving skills, that as opposed to the carnival barker or the car salesperson that you talked about. Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say that where personal relationship fits, we flip it. If I can drive Chad some business results and help you, hit your KPIs for the year, chances are pretty high that we're going to have an okay human relationship. But I think it's just flipping those to say, first of all, I need to make you a rock star in your organization and help you buy this and install this thing in a way that's going to make you a rock star. And chances are pretty good that we can follow that up with some scotch and golf. It's funny because another thing we talked about now on the soft skills, we've talked a lot about the business value skills and being prescriptive, which is dead on. You also talked about that you feel strongly that empathy is still a really powerful soft skill for sellers. Expound on that.
Yeah, I believe just empathy is a great personal skill, but it can be applied in business as well. I think a lot of times we do a really, really good job of teaching people to talk about our product. And then they're really good at knowing the bells and whistles, the features and benefits of our product. And salespeople have a tendency to become intoxicated with the sound of their own voice. So their presentations sound a lot like, here, I brought some donuts and coffee, take some donuts and coffee and sit down and be quiet because my presentation is going to tend to take a while. So ultimately,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, where I find that empathy really plays is just what you had kind of talked about, which was how do you help your client reach their KPIs? How do you make them a rock star? And until you can really have what I call genuine and honest empathy for where they are and know what it's and do your level set best to sit in their chair and understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish on a day in and day out basis and what keeps them awake at night and all of those sorts of things, I just don't believe you're ever going to be successful because you'll ultimately, because we do two things sometimes that don't help salespeople. Number one, we tell them about our product and tell them all the great reasons that people should buy it. So they get super fired up to go out and sell it. And then we put a quota on them and put that pressure on them to sell this great product. And so a lot of times when you put those two things together, you just end up with somebody that's just a bull in a china shop, just working to just tell them all about the product in the hopes that they just become so overwhelmed and excited about the product like you are
Yeah.
that they buy it without really truly sitting in their chair
Yeah.
and trying to map value to what they're trying to accomplish with what it is that you're offering. So we do a lot of value mapping in pre-calls
Excellent.
at Netrodyne right now so that we understand what are the overall objectives of the organization that we're trying to sell to map with what it is that we provide.
Perfect. It reminds me of a blog I wrote a while back to say it used to be discovery used to be, hey, what's keeping you awake at night? And I think in 2024, this is what should be keeping you awake at night. That's the prescriptive nature. So I want to end on something else we talked about, because we wandered into in our previous conversation about sales technology and the role that's playing in relationships. And you made a comment to me that I want you to share with our viewers, because I found it pretty powerful. Yeah, and if you don't recall, I can bring it up for you again. But yeah,
I mean, I do have opinions about some of the technology. I believe that there's a lot of technology out there that allows us to automate a lot of pieces of the sales process. And we all know what those look like.
yep,
They're automated email cadences, they're automated outreaches through InMail on LinkedIn and other tools along those lines. And early on, 20 years ago, when the advent of, kind of cloud-based CRMs and the ability to send out these emails in mass, I do believe there was some value associated with it. But it just appears at this point that we've gotten to the point to where we've kind of taken away what the salesperson's responsibility is and kind of turned it into this generic outbound. Like, you show up to see your manager and you're like, well, what were your outbound activities? And you're like, well, I put 25 accounts with 5 contacts each into a email cadence in whatever tool we currently use. And that somehow that's what you've done. So one of the things that we've done currently at Netrodyne is that and then typically those cadences are just some generic marketing something
yes,
or other. We all get them each and every day.
yep,
Somebody figures out your naming convention at your organization, and then I just get hammered with emails for outreach services or better ways to do marketing or better ways to qualify opportunities and things along those lines. And they're just noise. I don't even look at them. In fact, my daughter was a nanny in college, and the family that she worked for, he was the CIO of the largest hospital here in Boise, 450, 500 bed facility. So decent sized facility, but certainly not the Mayo Clinic by any stretch of the imagination. And he asked one day my daughter what her dad did for a living. And she told him that he was in software sales. And he mentioned to her that in a given day, he will get anywhere between 250 and 300 unsolicited emails a day from vendors requesting his time. He said if they're lucky, he will respond to one of those emails a month. And he goes, and the timing has to be perfect.
yes,
So that's what we're battling
yep,
when we're out there, quote, putting things in cadence.
yep,
And going out there and trying to do that. So the way that back to my original point, which is kind of how we've worked to combat that, is now we do a lot of, and it's easier in the enterprise space because the number of accounts is much smaller. So we don't have to scale to some of the level of mid-market and SMB or, B2C type folks might do. So this may fall as a moot point to those types of folks. But in the enterprise space, we spend a lot of time researching the company, reviewing 10K, CEO letters to shareholders, Google alerts, a lot of that sort of stuff, so that when we identify an account, not only are we identifying the account because it feels like it's a good fit for our solution, but we do a lot of 3x3 research, which I'm sure people have heard out there, which is, a business, personal, and a company thing, and then 3 bullet points for each of those. And then we craft our messages with regards to that. So even though we may still be using those same automation tools, we are not spitting out generic content, because that stuff right now, in my humble opinion, does not pierce the veil. Because one of the things that we started talking about was relationships.
yes,
And I am a firm believer that in 2024, the hardest and most difficult part of sales is access.
yeah,
So the way that you can leverage your relationships to just get access into an account and rise above the noise of cadences and generic emails and outbound SDRs who call you and go, hey, this is Chad, and I know you weren't expecting my cold call,
yeah,
but if you can give me 30 seconds, which seems to be the way people want to do it now. So that will go away and something new will replace it in 6 months from an SDR standpoint. But traditional, these cadences and automating and AI and chat GPT and all of this other stuff is amazing and it makes our life easier. But at times I believe that it really dilutes the message,
Yeah.
because no matter, I don't care what you're selling, sales is a contact sport. And the only way, you need to be having conversations, you need to be, face to face to the best you can, or in a Zoom, whatever. You need to be having real world conversations. Tone, all of that sort of stuff gets lost in digital communication. And I don't know anybody that's making, I know very few people that are willing to make a purchase decision, especially with an emerging technology that doesn't have some sort of face to face relationship with that
Yeah.
client. So, yeah, we've over automated a lot of this stuff, and
Yeah.
we've made it very, very easy for salespeople to say they're doing things when in reality they may or may not
Yeah,
be.
I think it's a cautionary tale. You're right. It plays a role, and it can work. But what you said to me is, I can tell a sequencing email the moment it lands in my inbox, and that's frightening. That's yeah. So it's we don't want to over rely on that. So I really appreciate this, and I do think, in the main, this shift from human only, mostly relying on the human relationship, to beginning to be more prescriptive in the business relationship is, again, I don't think many are going to argue with it, but there is the reality that I know a lot of folks doing the job who haven't made that transition, and people who support them who are not providing them with the prescriptive data to move them into that role. So I think this is an important discussion, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks. And maybe next time we'll talk about procurement. I'm dying to go there. So thanks. Thanks, Chad.